A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphix. So, as you probably know by now, the likes of HJN Graphix and Super Graphix have in fact allowed for me to showcase my overall introspective on various video games that I've played over the years. And for the record, I almost feel like that because of the acquisitions of GWK's own series revolving around video games, as well as a brand new series that I will be having pretty soon, also being dedicated to video games. But this will morely focus on the more nostalgic aspects of my life regarding video games as a whole. But until that happens, I'm going to be finishing up HJN Super Graphix with a few more titles in mind. One such case that I have in particular for number 2628 will be Persona 3 Reload. As you probably know by now, it's an early February 2024 release, 18 years after the release of the third official entry in the main timeline of the Persona series. As you know by now, the Persona series focuses on a group of friends from Japan, with each installment being dedicated to a new series of characters. There's hardly any crossovers to each other or anything like that. In fact, I never once saw any sort of collaboration between the first Persona, second, third, fourth, fifth, or whatnot. I almost can't be sure what Persona 6 would be like, but I guarantee it probably would be pretty cool to find out. In any case though, this Reload version of Persona 3 took 18 years to come around, as the game itself officially made its way in 2006, but here in 2024, in comparison to what the 06 version gave us, the Reload version actually did a good effort of revitalizing the old elements from Persona 3. And of course, the memorable cast of characters and storyline that folded from within. It not only managed to upgrade the overall file size, thereby making it a bit longer to download compared to what the original must have been like, but the thing is, there is so much that you can do in Persona 3 Reload in comparison, which just does probably a lot of the standard stuff most would expect here and there. Maybe a few unique innovations. I haven't really checked on what the third Persona installment is like as a means of comparison here. But in any case though, Persona 3 Reload is probably one of maybe top 10 best of 2024 regarding games. And the plot itself is what's unique. It revolves around a second-year high schooler whom had transferred to Gekohan High School, basically going over to Iwatodai High School dorm. This dormitory center is in fact home to a variety of different students. And all these different students, whom are of different years, they all get to spend their time together, cooking, watching TV, hanging out, going to bed, etc., studying, and all that good stuff. But Iwatodai dorm is in fact a pretty big venue. It's not only the safe haven for the crew, but it also happens to be the site of a supposed organization known as SEAS. Yeah, basically, this is one of those cases where this second-year high schooler, whom was just more of a transfer than anything else, he apparently happens to run into a bit of a phenomenon that is occurring all around. Now, because this is an RPG type game, much like all the other Persona games we've gotten so far, the second-year high schooler doesn't exactly have a concrete name embedded into him. In fact, he can be whatever name you want to put in him, even something ridiculous or funny. I, of course, stuck with my own name, Nowak, implanted in this second-year high schooler, and it seems fitting, even though, by comparison, he's a lot younger than me. A second-year high schooler, in comparison to how old I was about 16, 17 years old at the time, and now I'm 26, here in 2025. So, when you think about it, though, while it doesn't exactly match all that well, it seems to be a common theme of Kaiju Force Neo related stuff, especially regarding gaming with Kaiju Force Neo content, that my own name is put on as the RPG in-game character's name. So, sometimes I do make up different ones. Like Diablo 4, for instance, in which I called my character Millie Borovich. But that's a whole different story for probably another time here on the channel. Anyways, though, C's, which is in fact known as the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad, they are in fact tasked with a certain thing in mind. And while there are in fact a good number of students who are basically just normal persons in the game, including yourself, Junpei Iori, Yukari Takiba, Fuka Yamagishi, and various others as well. There's also other students as well. You got Mitsuru Kiriho, Akihiko Sanada, and even a few others here and there. But the thing is that while the leader / chairman of C's is basically responsible for overseeing the operations that go on in this supposed location, a dimension, if you will, that happens to appear at midnight every day. Yeah. This supposed location, known as Tartarus, happens to make way, emitting a somewhat foreboding green-like hue. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Every time it strikes 12 o'clock midnight, a cutscene basically plays, and it gets really green. It seems that green is the common running color that we happen to run into this particular title, even though on the box art and whatnot, the title screen and the menus and whatnot, it's all blue. So what gives? I mean, green and blue are kind of related to each other. Green is made possible because of blue, as well as yellow, which is something Persona 4 actually had, because after all, they did remake Persona 4 called Persona 4 Golden. I guess I might have to get into that some other time. Anyways, though, what basically happens is that the second year high schooler, which is of course yourself in the game, what happens is that one particular night at Iwatonai, he basically ends up on the roof encountering monsters and apparently awakens a certain power within him. This is what's regarded as the persona. Yeah, and I bet you didn't notice by now, is that there is some gun action taking place. There is in fact an opening cutscene where, unfortunately, there is a bit of a running theme in the game which involves some sort of self-infliction, if you will. Depictions of suicide. And that seems to be something that we happen to run into in this game, repeatedly. But the thing is that while this was thoroughly expressed by Yukari in the opening cutscene, this actually becomes more prevalent later on. You know, this sort of point the gun at the head type of phenomenon associated with suicide. This is actually something that Persona 3 Reload does use all the time. It's explained that the reason why this is necessary is because to activate your own persona at the heat of battle, it apparently requires a lot of self-infliction. Basically, like if you happen to get injured or your emotions happen to cause you to become enraged, that's the kind of powerful force from your body and mind necessary to unleash the power of your persona. And whatever the persona may be, whether it's something that you've established for yourself, basically, yourself in the game, the second year, and basically, he basically has all the access to all the different personas possible. And that's because he had been cordially invited to a place called the Velvet Room. Yeah, basically a character by the name of Elizabeth comes by, invites him in, and he sits down in a chair in front of this guy who kind of reminds me of Gru from Despicable Me. And the thing is that this Velvet Room happens to be the special place for where personas are not only created, but also empowered. The thing is that there's so many elements in this game, and I could probably go at it for a long time here. But the main gist is that the storyline of the game does in fact carry on not only the second year high schooler having to focus on school and occasional other things every now and then, which you can do since this is an RPG game. There's so many choices that you can make and so many elements in here. And I'll get to some of them later on. But here's the thing though. High school was the #1 priority for everybody in there. Junpei, Takiba, yourself, everybody basically. Every member of C's happens to attend Gekohan High School every single day. Ironically enough, even at some points during the summer, happens to be a point where school time is of the necessity. And I'll admit, I'm not exactly that familiar with how high school works in Japan versus how it works in the States, but this game does seem to give me a nice informative peace of mind, even some educational bits. Because, like I said, since high school is the priority one thing here, we do get to have some insight on certain different things that take place. For example, there's times where you'll be spending in the classroom. And this time in the classroom, for instance, is times where not only you have to focus on the work at hand that the teacher or instructor is presenting, but there's also some times where some of the other students, including your own teammates, like Junpei, for example, he happens to be the kind of guy who tries to be the ladies' man, but it seems to be a bit awkward. Nevertheless, he tries to act like the number one and also goes for the throat a lot of times. But this does sort of sacrifice his ability to become either intelligent or have good knowledge in certain school-related curriculums. Meanwhile, as yourself, there are 3 different elements here to keep in mind. And the more prominent you are in these fields, the higher they'll get. They can give you more points based on what actions you take in the game. You have courage, you have academics, and of course, you have charm. These 3 elements in particular are in fact rated by a special system that is triggered basically from whenever music notes pop up. These music notes, in fact, can be laid out to any one of the 3 categories relating to your current self as a person. And depending on how many of them that you get, they can be leveled up. Based on my latest playthrough, I was actually able to get up to level 4 on all 3 of them. Yeah, level 4 for academics, charm, and courage. So, I'm a pretty formidable person in this game by far. And I have gone through at least 30 plus hours of the game so far. And from what I imagine, it ain't even over yet. It's probably only at the halfway point. Persona 3 Reload is supposed to be even bigger and better than the original version. And so far, it's an outstanding piece. I mean, we not only went through all the times in high school, but there were also the points in summer, for instance, where the members of Seas do take a nice little vacation out on a ship, bound for an island. Yeah. And it's a pretty unique thing to keep in mind here. But then, of course, there come all the different battles on Tartarus. Basically speaking, Tartarus, like I've said, it's a never-ending tower with multiple floors. And all these floors comprise of different monsters called shadows. These shadows are in fact the primary target from where all of your characters engage in. Although, for the most part, they do only limit a team of 4 to enter Tartarus at a time. And depending on whom you pick, whether it be yourself, Kiriho, Sonata, Yukari, Junpei, some of the others even are in fact there as well. But we definitely can't forget to mention that we don't usually get to bring along Yamagishi in, because she is what's known as the navigator for the team. And that way, they can not only get good insight on what the floors are like, but also what to avoid in case they might be outmatched or overpowered. Yeah, there's lots of times where the enemies can be even stronger than yourself. And that's something to expect in RPG games like this. Remember Ark, Red Dead Redemption, and we definitely can't forget many others I've talked about just as well. There's plenty of times where enemies will be more powerful than you, usually of higher levels, and that definitely is not a good thing to have around or mess around with. But nevertheless, Tartarus was a unique thing to keep in mind. And a pretty expansive place to look around as well. I mean, so far I've explored 85 floors, and there doesn't seem to be a definitive end to it. Oh, but here's the real big thing that we need to worry about. There's a dozen bosses in the game that we have to face. We are given the knowledge ahead of time on the fact that every time there happens to be a full moon, one of these bosses will appear. And with each and every one of them, they sure do have a whole host of different abilities, whether unique or standard, patterns that may be easy to avoid or dodge, or possibly pre-planned so that you can avoid a fatal blow. And of course, special abilities all around the place. Not to mention, because this is an RPG game, there's also a bunch of items that you can collect. Various healing items, foods, beverages, and first aid kits for the most part, but there's also certain jewelry, treasures, and whatnot that you can find as well, especially amongst Tartarus. There's also various quests that you can complete for Elizabeth in the Velvet Room, in which that she'll give you special keys to unlock certain chests. Chests that might require these keys over time. And on top of all that, there's plenty of Tartarus-based bosses as well. Certain floors will house these bosses in particular, but I kind of more consider them as mini-bosses in a way. Because the real bosses are the ones that show up in the full moon. And sometimes, not only in Tartarus, but in the real world too. In fact, there comes a part at one point where the team unfortunately goes into a house and basically tries to find the monster via looking through the mirrors and whatnot. And by destroying these mirrors, this supposedly allows for them to gain access to the rooms in general in which this particular boss is hiding in. And once you finally find him, and well, it's quite a rough road that you've gone through. I mean, it comes to a point where you've lost your memories, and all your teammates are in shambles just as well. It's definitely quite a way to mess with you, mentally and physically. But hey, after getting through all that, it was quite a satisfying battle to put myself through. I practically beat him with little effort. And all because I did end up doing a lot of pre-time and pre-planning before making my way there. Oh, but here's one other thing you're going to want to know. After all that time spent at Gekkohan High School, there's plenty of things that you can do out there in Gekkohan entirely. Basically, there's plenty of things that you can do outside of the high school in general. You can get together with friends and form bonds with them, which in turn can grant you access to special personas coming from various grades. And depending on which ones they may be, you could definitely get a special advantage out there in the battlefield, especially in Tartarus or whatnot. Or, of course, you can always go ahead and get a part-time job simply by walking in there, asking for a part-time job, and then working in there for the rest of the day, and then getting paid. So that's actually one thing that seems to intrigue me pretty well. Imagine going up there, asking for a job, and then they put you in right away. Wouldn't that save us all the trouble of having to apply, interview, and then arrange for a time to start getting to work? Would that actually be helpful or whatnot? If they could just cut to the chase instead? I don't even know. Japan is so much more different. Yet it's impressive that Japan and America are like best buddies. But hey, don't take my word for it. Anyways though, apart from that though, the bonding with friends, the times where you can earn additional points in currency by going in to do some part-time work, or even to getting to spend some time with your own teammates. I mean, there's times where Sonata, for instance, he happens to be a big boxing champion, and a fan of it at the least, which would explain why he only uses his fists in combat. There's literally a time where he actually gets injured and is unable to join you for a little while, and the same thing can happen to some of the other characters, depending on what happens, of course. Thankfully, nothing had really happened to any of my characters, basically leaving them out of the equation for a while. And when you think about it, there's a good amount of time I've also spent with the friends in particular. Oh, but the real joy is that the further into the game we go, the more people we find and the more teammates we encounter. There's literally an android in the game named Aegis. Yeah, an android girl whom you find in the jungle near the beach on your little vacation. And she apparently was made specifically to assist Seas in their operations. And then there's a dog named Koromaru, who was basically a Shiba Inu. Yeah, no joke, I had to look that up. I literally figured he was a husky because of the way that his fur color palette looked. But no, he's a Shiba Inu. Surprise, surprise. But what makes him special is the fact that he happens to be a bit on the anthropomorphic side. An animal with human-like characteristics. On top of that, he had special empowerment because of the fact that ever since his original owner had died, he basically never gave up on life. He wasn't like some other dogs we know, where sometimes they're lost without their owners, or they have no idea what to do. No, but the fact is that he found a special haven alongside seas. On top of all that, there's even a little guy, a young boy, whom joins you just as well. Obviously, he's a bit too young for any of the combat seen in Tartarus and whatnot. As I've stated before though, I have yet to fully finish the game. I've only gotten through about 8 bosses, with only about 4 remaining. And from what I understand, with some of the full playthroughs going about 50, 60 hours worth of gameplay, and having my own being no less than 35 hours, I'd say, I've still got a long way to go here. I've still got a good amount of time spent. And I feel like that there's just a lot more elements I have yet to learn about the game's plot and the storyline and the many other things I could probably do here and there. So the thing is that with all the high school stuff, fighting, working with a police officer to buy and exchange certain things, bonding with friends and family that you've established over the whole time that you've spent out there in Gekkohan, conflicting with your own emotions and your own instincts in life, basically becoming a true leader from within. And then there's the occasional boy in the striped pajamas. Yeah, no joke. There's basically a young kid who wakes you up at night and basically looks like he's wearing old-fashioned prison attire, like they did way back in the day, before it all became orange. Yeah, so that's basically there just as well. Otherwise, Persona 3 Reload has a lot for me to talk about. But I definitely don't need to go over everything at the same time. So I'll pretty much just leave it with all the stuff that I've already planned out so far. But for everything else, it's pretty much just pure history that they made. Although, one other thing is worth mentioning. Lotus Juice. Yep. A full soundtrack was in fact composed not only by Atlas Game Music themselves, but also, as a special guest, Japanese-American hip-hop artist Lotus Juice also makes an appearance in a few of the tracks. Especially when it comes down to such memorable hits like Mass Destruction, Going Down Now. I tell you, a lot of people felt very different after hearing his songs. I guess not much more is worth for me to mention here. Not much. So, with all that in mind, I feel like I've talked a lot of good things about Persona 3 Reload, and there's not a whole lot of bad things out there, apart from maybe the fact that because it's a long-running RPG game, it can feel a bit repetitive over time. But other than that, I'm not seeing many things wrong with this. I'm almost willing to clarify this as being probably even better than Persona 5, or any of the other games released in that tangent. But otherwise, Persona 3 Reload is certainly top 10 best of 2024, beyond any doubt. Atlas has definitely turned themselves around after these somewhat not so great things they've done over the years. And for that reason, let's go ahead and give it the scoring. 8.5 out of 10.1. Pretty solid in its own right, but there's a lot more that I have yet to find out. So, we'll just have to see how it all goes down, and I'm sure I might update this video with something else on the channel later on, once I fully finish it. Until then though, make sure to come by tomorrow for another piece of HJN Super Graphics, and like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.